Tere tulemast kõigile. And now we'll continue in English. Hello to everyone here in this beautiful town of Tartu that I consider my favorite town, but I'm not living here at the moment. I have lived here for 15 years or so. And welcome, Elisabet, Dr. Elisabet Sahtouris.
Aloha, everyone from Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, on the other side of the world, a little more than halfway. Lovely to be here in your truly beautiful city. Yes.
So, let's get going. Dr. Elisabet, first and foremost for me, at least, is a superb storyteller. He's a very, very good storyteller. So I will start with a story of my own. It will be a short one, but important one and connected to Dr. Elisabet. Some of you may know it, but still, you know, like it is with the stories, you have to tell them over and over, repeat them. So the story goes like that, and it's a true story. It's not based on a true story. It is a true story. So it is year 2000. I'm working in Tartu, in Estonian Fund for Nature, and there is internet, and I'm looking. There is no Google, I think. Yes, were other search engines, and it's very interesting. And I'm looking for models or other stories about the world, actually, because you know, working in Estonian Fund for Nature, protecting the nature against those who want to destroy it, this is getting somewhat boring. One protects, other demolishes or destroys. So is there any other model? And then somehow I found the website that is still there, radical.org, and then there was a book, fully online, by Elisabet Sahtouris, called Earth Dance, Living Systems in Evolution. I don't show it yet because I didn't have the book. I printed it out. And I took the A4s.
It's a lot of paper.
A lot of paper, but chapter by chapter. Yeah? I wasted lots of paper, yes.
You didn't waste it.
Yeah, no. I didn't waste, yeah. That's true. So, and went to Toomemägi, Dome Hill in the evening, in July, very nice weather, and then started to read it from these printed leaves. And believe it or not, better believe it, it was truly transformative reading for me. And I don't say it lightly, like, you know, like a transformational event, transformational book. It was, really. And why? I studied biology here in Tartu, and let's say during my biology studies, I felt somehow, I can really say it, I felt somehow that something doesn't work, something's wrong in this picture. And about evolution, but other things, the methods of science, you know, we had to kill lots of living beings to do science and so on. And reading this book, okay, I can show it to you now. Well, it was, my father was a photographer, and when I first saw a photo on the paper just appearing, you know, in this top, yeah. So it was a feeling like this, that, aha, there is a bigger picture. These things, these people, they're doing this and that. Aha, cooperation, interesting. consciousness. Interesting. Evolution. Wow. So, and it was 23 years ago, and I would really say that it gave a direction to what I have been doing since then. And an evidence to that is that I translated this book into Estonian, so maailmatants, yeah. And I will end soon my short story. And then I wrote the book myself. Last year, it was published last year, and as it is, sometimes there are stories inside stories, and it starts, you see, summer 2000, Toomemägi, I'm reading Elisabet's book, and so it goes, stories in stories in stories. Anyway, I have done my talking. I will maybe ask some questions, but to start with, maybe Elisabet, could you share a bit of your story, how it came all about?
I have both United States and Greek citizenship, but I was born in Athens, but Athens, New York, in the United States. And I was free to run in nature as a child. We lived on the Hudson River, which is now one of the cleanest rivers in North America, but was at one time very polluted, got cleaned up. And I sometimes say I still have the mud of the Hudson River between my toes because that childhood was so important to be around, to be allowed to be run free in nature. Much later, I watched my own grandchildren and now my great-grandchildren who are constantly supervised in nature. And so I learned to climb trees and to walk on thin ice, and once I wrote a poem for children on Earth Day called No Grown-Ups Watching, and that I learned some of the great life lessons because they were not watching. And I said, now we all have to be up high to see far. And now we are all walking on thin ice and have to watch our step and what we do with our lives. Such things were, in a sense, later apparent to me as good life lessons. Another one was that we crossed fences. We didn't pay any attention to keep out signs as children. And I say, now you have to break laws, some laws. You have to break the rules people have made in order to make a sustainable world, because the rules are not always in our favor. So I wanted to study biology because I early asked what I did not know were the great philosophical questions of the ages. Who are we? We humans. Where did we come from? Where are we going? So I first had to study art because my parents said, this is in the 1940s into 50s. I graduated high school in 1952. And so when I was going to university in 1952, my parents said, no, science is for boys, and you must study art. It's more feminine, yes. So I actually got a degree in art at Syracuse University. I had a full scholarship for 4 years, room, board, tuition, everything, and I could choose the university. And as it happens, I chose Syracuse University, where Oren Lyons was also going to school. He is the most important, best-known Native American chief now in the indigenous world, in the Haudenosaunee nation, which is what we call the Iroquois, or what the French called the Indians, the Iroquois. And I sometimes say we studied art together before he became an Indian chief and before I became a scientist. So after those 4 years that I was free of parental influence, I went into studying science and eventually got a PhD in science and then did postdoctoral work at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And that's kind of the trajectory of my education. Then over the years, it was as if science that I had been taught was a suit that became too tight for me. Like maybe I was a caterpillar who had to break out into being a butterfly, or whatever image metaphor you want to use. There were things about Western science that did not answer these big questions. Here I had become an evolution biologist who studies the 4 billion years of history of Earth, which makes me a deep pastist, yeah? Long pastist, in order to be a good futurist. Because if you don't know where you've come from, it's hard to see where you can go next. So I like to say I'm a pastist to be a good futurist. And I started to look into my own science, what's wrong with it, what's the difference between the standard model of physics and the quantum physics discoveries. And I found out, for instance, that I started to call the science I was trained in, which gives out PhDs all over the world now in the universities, Western science, to distinguish it from some of, for instance, the Eastern sciences. The quantum theorists, when they broke through matter, the Western science, of course, is based on matter and energy. And when they broke through matter, they found this strange source field, this mysterious field that was giving rise to everything. And eventually, they tried how do we explain this? And they came to call it consciousness. And so they had to turn to Vedic science from India, which was a consciousness-based science rather than a matter-based science. And all of the founding fathers of quantum science acknowledged that they had turned to Vedic science for their explanation of what they were doing. Because science always rests on some kind of a foundational story. We're talking about storytelling. Shall I go a little bit further?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. You cannot make science is about making theories, hypotheses, theories, and then testing them through experiments, right? And getting results, interpreting them, and making them coherent with other results. But in order to make a theory of how a universe works, you have to have some idea what's a universe, right? You can't make that theory in a vacuum. You have to know what you're making a theory about. And that is the fundamental story of a science, which we dignify with the word axioms, right? To make it very formal set of statements. So Western science, for instance, states the universe is made of matter and energy. Einstein came along and showed us that matter and energy are really the same thing. So nowadays I use a model of a keyboard, an endless keyboard, because both quantum science, the one thing they really agree on, standard model from Newton to Einstein kind of, physics, and quantum science agree that the universe somehow seems to be made of vibrations. So you can represent vibrations on a keyboard, but it's an endless, very long keyboard, just sweeping off into cosmic consciousness with matter in the low keys and then energy in the mid-range, and then it gets less and less material into mind, spirit, consciousness, these things that Western science, trying to derive the universe from the matter end of the keyboard, gets stuck because one of its axioms is, to be real, something must be measurable. How do you measure things? With physical instruments. So because it requires a physical instrument to measure it, it gets harder and harder to measure things like consciousness and mind, right? So Western science kind of gets stuck going up the keyboard, while the Eastern sciences simply say we start with consciousness in the high vibrations and then just slow them down to get to electromagnetic energy after 0-point energy, which is as far as Western science goes, and then down into matter. So they can derive the whole keyboard just by the concept of slowing down the vibrations. And this model is also quite useful when people often talk nowadays of we really must integrate science and spirit. Yes, have you heard that idea that they should be integrated? And I say, look at the keyboard and ask, why did we take them apart? You are not a body with a mind, you know, you're a body mind, a body spirit, a body energy mind, but you're the whole keyboard. And it's interesting that if you believe in non-physical beings, they can only play in the top end of the keyboard. They say, for example, angels are lined up for human bodies. Why? Because only from a physical body can you play the whole keyboard, right? If you're only in the non-physical, you can do lots of things. There's a big world out there of beings, but you can't play in the low keys without a body, a physical body. So these are interesting concepts that I came to over the years to try to explain things, because I think my mission in life is to make these complex ideas as simple as possible for people to understand. Yeah?
Yesterday, Dr. Elisabet actually showed us a cartoon book that she authored with some artists, I guess, yeah? And also narrated it, and it was just perfect. And what was the subject? Bacteria. So you might wonder how one can really compose a perfect cartoon book about bacteria, but it's possible.
But what's the title of the book?
Yeah,
Bacteria are us.
Exactly. And Earth Dance Living Systems in Evolution. So the keywords here: bacteria, are us, evolution. So what are your main discoveries as an evolution biologist?
What does that all mean? Why are we bacteria? Evolution can be very nicely on a linear time scale. I should have mentioned earlier, you know, two things that are very interesting about Western science that it ignores completely is the fact that it ignores it is what's interesting. One is that it's always now. None of us have ever been outside of now. We can remember a past, we can project a future, but we can't be in them at the same time unless we go into the eternal now deeply enough to have everything be happening at once, right? The other thing that it ignores, I mean, have any of you ever been outside of now? Nope, I guess not. As I say, you can imagine yourself in something other than now, but because humans have invented a timeline, you can't function in a physical world without inventing a timeline. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here at the same time and all that. The other thing is that it ignores the fact that all of your experience is coming through your consciousness. There's no other way to get any information except through your consciousness. And because Western science has trouble accessing consciousness, it can't measure it right, only very limited aspects of it, it has to ignore that too. And these are two very fundamental things about being alive. Anyway, evolution in linear time is about 4 billion years. Half of that, 2 billion years, there were only bacteria on the planet, and the viruses, which I believe the bacteria invented as storage capsules for information, because a virus is basically a bunch of DNA and RNA, and then it has a protein coat to protect it and to put an address on for where that bacterium can go. Like a bacterium cannot get into a human cell without knocking on the door and then showing that the address and either say, you have the wrong address, move on, or they let it in. They open the door to it. They don't force their way in the way we are led to believe. And by the way, each of your cells is constantly spitting out viruses that look exactly like the COVID virus. In fact, I think they took pictures of the ones that come out of the cell all the time that you have been seeing very often in the past few years. So 2 billion years, only bacteria. However, in those 2 billion years, there was a lot going on in the bacterial colonies, the societies that they built. And they are the only creatures other than us who caused both global hunger and global pollution, which is very interesting. And it's a good reason for learning more about ancient bacteria, because they solved both of those crises and we have not. So basically, there were 3 kinds of bacteria over time. The first were fermenting bacteria that were eating the free sugars and acids lying around on the early homogenized surface of the planet. And when they ate them all up, there was global hunger. But the bacteria were inventive enough to change their own DNA and to start making food from what was left, which was minerals, water, and sunlight. And they did it. They figured out how to make food from those few things that were left over. And those were the photosynthesizing bacteria. So fermenters, then photosynthesizers, and they were giving off the waste gas of oxygen, like the plants do, right? Plants and animals adopted some of these ancient ways of life. So they polluted the skies because they were so successful that they coated the whole Earth eventually. And there was so much oxygen in the atmosphere that these fermenters had to go underground because it was killing them otherwise. And we still have them in swamps when we see bubbles. We use them to make beer and have otherwise enslaved them. So what happened? You had to have yet another invention of using the oxygen to smash food molecules to make them digestible for the bacteria. Where was this food that they were going to get besides what the photosynthesizers were making wasn't enough? So some of those morphed into, redesigned themselves into respiring bacteria, breathing bacteria, which is the way of making a life that you use oxygen to process your food. And we are breathers ourselves, right? Because we have mitochondria, which were ancient breathers in our own cells. So eventually you have these 3 kinds, and the breathers, the third kind, were very high tech. Indeed, they invented nuclear piles. They took radioactive materials, consumed them, and kept them in their nests then, which warmed them up nicely. And they started the first World Wide Web, because each of them could exchange DNA with any other all over the planet. So they had an information system planet-wide, first World Wide Web. And they invented the electric motor. And these electric motors are the precursors of the motors that sperm cells have. They have rotors, stators, camshafts, all the different components of an actual electric motor, even ball bearings in it, and are way more efficient than our motors. So the nanotech people are trying desperately to figure out how to assemble them, and so far they've been completely unsuccessful. These bacteria grow these motors of more than 40 different kinds of proteins involved in order to have something that will drive a flagellum, a tail, around so that they can motor about. And what they did was they motored about into big bubbler bacteria in what I call bacterial colonialism, eating these big colonies from the inside. That's why I call it colonialism, right? Exploiting them. And of course, that came to a bad end, as the cartoon book shows. You then kill off your exploited colony. But they eventually figured out that if they started with a big bubbler and instead of eating it up, attached themselves with their motors to the outside so that they could move around to where the sunlight was, and then take the photosynthesizers, the blue-greens, aboard into the ship to make food when you drove them into the sunlight. So they invented this huge cooperative colony where each of them gave some of their DNA into this, what we call a nucleus, as an information library. It is not a command and control center any more than your brain is in your body. Your brain is an information clearinghouse that helps organize the body, but it isn't a command and control center in the sense that we make our businesses. So what happened here, I realized as I was studying these things, is a maturation cycle where you go from an expansion economy and when you take all the resources you can get and you grow your economy as fast as possible, just the way your cells expanded up to adolescence, and then you didn't get any taller, and your cells for the rest of your life have to cooperate, replacing themselves but not making you expand to new cells. Even if you gain weight, you're just bloating some of your cells. You're not really an expansion economy except in that sense. So again and again I found this in studying ecosystems. For instance, ecologists talk about type 1 ecosystems, type 3 ecosystems. In a type 1, they are very competitive and take all the resources they can get and fight each other, elbow each other out of the way in order to build an expansion economy. In a type 3, everything is feeding everything else and recycling and being highly cooperative. They actually call a type 1 pioneer, and the third kind climax, beginning, end, right? And if you ask what's a type 2, they'll say it's a kind of mixture of both kinds, but they don't see the maturation from youth to maturity, from the feisty, expansive phase into the mature cooperative phase. And I'm absolutely convinced that what happens in nature is always the cycle of growing up, of maturing. And the advantage of seeing that in nature is that you start to understand exactly what's happening to humanity today. That we have had now up to 10,000 years of building empires that have command and control organizations, economies. And now we find that they're getting unsustainable, which means what? Cannot last. That they are at an end, that they're at a dead end in nature. Either they collapse and everything goes extinct, or we move into a mature cooperative phase. And that's what we're seeing now, is that we are right in this incredibly creative transition from the youthful mode to the mature mode. And that helps us see what we have to do to build a future, doesn't it? Yeah? How are we doing?
We're doing good, but yeah, the body. What about? Okay, I was reading Darwin, some 500 meters from here in the library of Tartu University. The original one, the origin of species, and it was really interesting, and I really have now. It's even a bit arrogant to say that I have huge respect for Charles Darwin, but it's true. He was a great scientist. The only thing is that I think also related, or because of his background of English country nobility or something like that, seeing all the animals and plants spread there, to get fatter or whatever, and So he kind of saw that there has to be someone who chooses who will die and who will live and who will give descendants. And then he's talking about the struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. So struggle, survival, but no cooperation. And then this is what, now I can tell it now that I felt that, well, a bit weird. Yeah, of course, well, Darwin said it and everything, that there is respect, but something doesn't add up. And in Earth Dance, Elisabet is just ingenious, perfect telling about our bodies. Every one of us has a body. That's a fact. So can you elaborate?
He's talking about my body economics model and economics. I get all my economics and politics from nature. And it's a wonderful thing to do that, because when you can argue that they're in nature, it's very difficult for people to say you're wrong. Because you can point, for instance, to their bodies. And you can say, okay, we all have a diaphragm between the heart-lung system and the guts and bones and the legs and things. And suppose we call the heart-lung system the northern industrial organs. And we find that in order to make blood in the body, these northern industrial organs have to mine the stem cells, the incipient red blood cells out of bone marrow all over the body and sweep it up here to the northern industrial organs where we purify the blood cells and we add oxygen from the lungs, and then we have a complete blood product. And what if the heart then announced the body price for blood is so much? Who would like to buy some? What if some of those exploited bones can't afford it? How long would you last with that kind of an economic system, right? It's not very cooperative, it's competitive. It's like a capitalist system. Now, the communists sacrificed the individual to community, what they called the communal good. But the capitalists sacrificed community to the individual. So we practiced rank individualism. You are what matters. You are competing with everyone else. You are trying to climb to the top of the corporate ladder, or you want to be president. This whole idea that the individual is much more important than anything else. And communism, the communal good is what matters. Are we talking too loud? We're getting in the way of something else happening here. But what we see in nature is that there is always this dialogue going on between individual and community. My universe is so wide open and so creative that I say the only principle at work, I don't believe there are laws in the universe. I'm with Rupert Sheldrake is with me, we are together on this, that I say, my universe is so creative that anything that can happen will happen. What's interesting in that kind of a universe is what really works, what survives. And I came to the conclusion that what survives is what is building mutual reciprocity, mutual beneficial reciprocity between whatever it is and its surrounding context. In other words, if I feed you, you feed me, right? So in any indigenous culture, the individual is always listened to and always sits in the community circle. And you have to dialogue between what the individual wants and what's good for the whole community. The Iroquois that I mentioned before, the Haudenosaunee, kept 1,000 years of peace after uniting 6 warring nations. And one of their tactics was that if a man wanted to declare war, he had to put on a skirt and carry a corn grinding bowl and then say, let's make war. Reminding everybody what will happen to the food supply, what will happen to the women and children if we make war. And they succeeded in keeping the peace under the great law of peace for a long time until the Europeans came in. and didn't know what to make of this culture, but Benjamin Franklin, for instance, one of the founding fathers writing the Constitution, spent a lot of time with the Indians and learned their ways. And there was also broadsheets, single-page papers printed at the time to pass news around. And so the people learned some things about this culture. And especially the women noticed that the women seemed to be having equal rights with the men. It was a new concept to them. Eventually that led to the suffragette movement, to fighting for women's rights, because the Indian women didn't have to do that. The grandmothers were choosing the chiefs because they knew which young men would serve their societies, and they had the power to take them out. So they didn't want to be the chiefs themselves, but they had the power to make and break chiefs if they were not serving their society. But always this dialogue between every cell in your body has to communicate with the other cells in that order, and each of them, every individual has to meet self-interest. You need food, you need oxygen, you have certain needs that you don't want them to become selfish, but they are self-interest to keep you alive. So you have to negotiate your self-interest with the self-interest of the larger surround, the organ, and the organ with the organ system, and the organ systems with the whole body. And this holons in holarchy, holons are biological entities that you can see as entities, like a cell. And then the holons in holarchy can go on in this layered onion skins way, so that when you have a whole body, then it's within a family, within a community, within an ecosystem, nowadays within a nation, within a planet, within a galaxy, within a universe, right? It's holons all the way up and down. And when you have that sense that always you have to negotiate with the larger community that you're embedded in, so that both the community and the individual are meeting self-interest. That's how nature works. And in an expansion economy, that's kind of forgotten. And so capitalism is actually a youthful mode. And we have to figure out, what do we do next? In the Basque country of Spain, how many of you have heard of Mondragon, the community of Mondragon? Okay, nobody has. About 40 or more years ago, a Catholic priest went around to all the places young people hang out, bars, coffee shops, whatever, and he said, what if we wanted to build a society that was neither capitalist nor communist, but based on loving human relationships? What would it look like? And they had lots of dialogues to try to figure out how to do this. And eventually they built it. And they decided, for example, that no one should earn more than 6 times the lowest salary in the culture. So if the janitor in your organization makes 50,000 euros a year, then the highest boss can only make 300,000, right? That's a very much narrower range than we have in the world today, right? Where we have thousands of times the lowest salary going in the culture. And they didn't want to leave anyone out. So everyone had to have a job, and when you started to work in one of the businesses, it's an urban cooperative with businesses. In fact, some of your buses are made in Mondragon, I understand. The electric buses?
No, the buses, at least in Tallinn, I don't know about Tartu, but the brand name is Irisaar. These are made by the same Mondragon cooperative, so it's not a fairy tale of faraway Basque country, but something you can touch.
Yes,
and ride
so
on.
they are making industrial products, washing machines, refrigerators, buses, things like that. that are being sold outside of their culture. They have their own banks, their own university. As I say, everyone that starts working in a company, part of their salary goes right away into shares in the company. And you can never sell your shares. Everybody in the whole company has shares in it, and it's limited the number of them to keep it as equitable as possible. They have a grocery store line that's through all of Europe now. I know in Mallorca when I was there, it was the local grocery store chain. They have their own banks. In the 2008 crash time, they were doing very well and were lending money to the other banks. So it works. We have examples in the world of how to build a peaceful and relatively equitable society. If there's a time when they have to lay off people in one of the businesses, everyone is retrained to do something else. No one ever falls into poverty. Everyone is taken care of, and it's a very mature society. In Sri Lanka, there is a rural massive cooperative enterprise called the Sarvodaya movement. And there, they have a retired banker who's in charge. He used to be in charge of the whole Sri Lanka banking business. And then now he's working only for this cooperative. And people have bank books with pennies, little tiny amounts of money put into a bank book so that they know while it's in the bank, other people can borrow it to buy a new farm implement or whatever, to bootstrap each other, to help each other develop in 15,000 little hamlets and villages. It's really remarkable. I've been there, I've seen this. I've seen the 12-year-old girls sewing clothes for the new babies that they find on garbage heaps sometimes, people throwing babies away. They raise them, they take care of them. The school children are just delightful to sing for you and in their uniforms, and everybody's taken care of there too. And the kids are taught from early on, as soon as they can sit and meditate a little bit, they are taught two principles: inner peace and generosity. That's all. Can I be a peaceful person who is always thinking, what have I got to give to my fellow beings? So we have such examples. And we now have this chain of global eco-village network, right? And in the US, we have Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, where each local living economy is set up so that the businesses are feeding each other. The waste of one may be useful to another, and highly cooperative systems where people are taking care of each other. This kind of thing is happening everywhere in the world, all over, in Africa, in Australia, in North and South America. It's around the world, in Asia, everywhere. So what's happening is that the new world that's coming from the bottom up is the future. The old top-down command and control center we know it's unsustainable, and it's gradually imploding. You don't have to do anything to take it down. You don't have to worry about it failing, because it is failing. And what we want to do now, unfortunately, our high-tech society has, over the past couple hundred years, caused an immense amount of pollution and an immense amount of exploitation of ecosystems, to the point where we are the first species to cause the 6th global extinction. I think you've probably all heard that. That's what's happening on the planet now, because we've been very destructive. We do not recycle the way nature does. And I'm looking at different sciences in the world through doing symposia to see if we could sometime do something like the Parliament of World Religions with the sciences, Taoist science, Islamic science, all the indigenous sciences. For 40 years I've been working in an organization called the Worldwide Indigenous Science Network, which we started in order to show young people in indigenous cultures that their cultures do real science, and then show our culture, our non-indigenous culture, to respect the indigenous cultures because they actually do real science. You know, it was kind of a dual mission. Unfortunately, right now in Maui, the founder of this organization, my dear friend, Apila Colorado, just lost her entire home and barely escaped with her life in the terrible Holocaust fire in her historic town of Lahaina on the island of Maui. But that's my goal, is to have a consortium, a global consortium of sciences, the way we have a parliament of world religions, where they listen to each other and they can provide, not trying to make each other alike any more than your liver wants the rest of your organs to become a liver. You know, it wouldn't make any sense, would it? But we humans have invented the concept of monoculture. We made a huge mistake by separating plants and animals in agriculture and then monoculturing each of them in stupid, torturous ways, torturing the plants and torturing the animals by feeding them artificially with toxic chemicals and all that, when nature had the one solution of keeping them together. There is nowhere in nature where you ever see a monoculture. It's always diverse. And we have to learn the value of diversity, to hear each other, to listen to each other, not to try to turn ourselves into a monoculture. Yeah? So these are a whole bunch of ideas that I think we should maybe go into dialogue and see what people want to.
Yeah, soon. Well, I just very briefly wanted to say about the body. What I'm teaching also students in school and also in university, based on the ideas from Elisabet's book, that just imagine that, every one of us has 50 trillion around. Nobody has counted, really, but the best estimate at the moment is 50 trillion cells, eukaryotic, like real, with nucleus cells in our body, plus the same amount or more bacteria. So
no, 10 times as many.
Yeah, maybe 500 trillion, whatever. So, and we cannot even imagine these numbers, but one cell, as far as I understand, can be compared to a town like Tartu or Tallinn or even New York with its complexity. And this is not an exaggeration. It is so if you dig into it. So how come 50 trillion big cities work together? Nobody is in command. Definitely, we are not telling a liver cell what to do. It would end very quickly, very tragically, probably. So how come it all works? So it's kind of so self-evident that it's a huge cooperative.
It's possible.
Yeah.
We're only, 8 billion people on the planet, and we have 50 trillion city-sized or city complexities working in harmony. Yeah.
And that how come it came about by accident?
I don't think so. But there's a lovely book by a man named Lewis Thomas called Lives of a Cell. And he wrote this long before we understood about our gut bacteria, which now we're learning a lot about. He said, maybe the ancient bacteria built us as big taxis to get around in safely. And it's more and more feeling true now, because our gut bacteria, we cannot live without them. No multi-celled creature on the planet does not have a big consortium of bacteria working with it in harmony. It's very hard to develop or to keep a bacteria-free mouse in a laboratory, as scientists try to do, because the mice die when you deprive them of their bacteria. It doesn't work. So we all are absolutely dependent on our gut bacteria and our skin bacteria, because they make our vitamins, they repair our cell walls, they're arranging our hormones, they're doing all kinds of services for us. And yet we came to the conclusion somehow bacteria are germs. How many of you use the chemical hand wipes to keep your hand free of germs? Any of you use those? Nobody else? They're in they're in the bathroom even here in this building. Okay, you do. I suspect nobody else does? Uses hand wipes?
In laboratories and hospitals.
What?
Mandatory in laboratories and hospitals.
It was, yeah, in a hospital. They use them on the bottle of the chemical, whatever it is, alcohol, whatever. It says 99.8% effective, something like that, right? What about the 0.02%? Who are they? What kind of bacteria are going to survive this genocide? The worst ones are left alone on your hands. Right? Good old soap and water is what you need to use. And soap and water was a very important invention. In fact, you know, a lot of disease problems went away with sanitation. That was a very important discovery because people were pretty filthy about the way they were living for a very long time. So it's no wonder they got sick. But sanitation is very important. But you have to be careful exactly what you're extinguishing and what you're keeping alive. So these things are lessons that we're just now, you know, beginning to understand.
Yeah, and before getting to the dialogue, there is one more thing. Not the most important thing, but in a way it is the most important for us. Our planet here, Gaia, and Elisabet's, I think, latest book so far has a title of Gaia's Dance.
Gaia's Dance.
Yeah,
The story of Earth and us.
Exactly, it's there on the table. So I think it's very important that we hear it from the source, who and what is Gaia, and also I feel it like a really historic moment or historic week in this sense that James Lovelock, who knows who is James Lovelock? Please raise your hands. Some of you do. Okay, I hope Elisabet will tell about James Lovelock a bit. James Lovelock, for at least this is my take, was one of the most brilliant minds of 20th century. Okay, we cannot rate, but he definitely was in that category. And he's the one who scientifically came to the conclusion that the Earth is somewhat alive or has features of a living organism. And he was a personal friend of Elisabet, so maybe you can tell this story as well. Yeah?
There's another thing about this picture. I thought you were going to mention the ammonite.
Please do.
Everybody know what an ammonite is? The cover of the book, with the Earth in the middle, the rest of it is an ammonite. It's an ancient creature that was fossilized. Yes, they can be very beautiful. And this one in particular is in the London Geological Museum. You recognize it. This ammonite to me represents what I call life is rock rearranging itself. A planet with a rocky crust formed life by rearranging the crust. And I really got this idea from a book that Jim Lovelock gave me, because he didn't understand the value of the book himself, but Lynn Margulis, his partner in the Gaia theory, had given it to Jim. It says, Closet Gaia, Love Lynn, in the cover, inside, Closet Gaia. This book was about Vernadsky, V.I. Vernadsky in Russia. And he had the first real theory. Vernadsky worked with, who thought up the noosphere? Pierre de Chardin.
De Chardin.
They were colleagues, and they
Really?
worked together.
Okay.
And they were the first to really understand how geology becomes biology. And Vernadsky would use examples like a locust plague. Suddenly the locusts are coming up in a swarm and they're eating maize fields by the ton, right? And growing into swarms and swarms, and then they all die and they collapse into the earth, and they go deeper and deeper as the tectonic plates of the earth slide over each other, and earth goes back down into the magma where it gets molten, and we have the volcanoes where it splits open, or the earthquakes. So he saw that whole recycling of a planet that's endlessly creating itself on the surface from the inside. And I paraphrased that for young people because of rock music, like life is rock rearranging itself, right? You rearrange music to change it. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Also, just one little lesson in politics from nature. Nature is profoundly conservative with things that work well and radically changes things that do not work. Think like in the US Democrats and Republicans. Republicans are the conservative party, and then the Democrats considered the more progressive party. What if, instead of being told that we're antagonistic and every 4 years one of the other parties is going to win, we recognize the cooperative need of taking every issue and looking at, is this working well? Then come on, protectors, protect it. Is it not working? Come on, change agents, see what you can do to make it something different that will work. That should be a cooperative arrangement, a mature cooperative arrangement rather than a youthful antagonism. And we have to learn this kind of lesson now. As we build up the grassroots new world, we know in a family why if one person is not doing well, the others have to help out if it's sick or needs a psychiatrist or whatever. If the family is going to be in balance again, you have to put extra resources there. In the body, if you cut your foot and extra resources go there with blood or whatever, the rest of the cells don't say, how come they're getting more, you know? These things are worked out. So the politics and the economics, the absolute ethics practiced within a body. Darwin thought humans have to add ethics as the next layer without noticing, you know, how ethical your own body is. What happens when some of the cells in your body stop negotiating with their organs and turn self-interest into selfishness and only want themselves to reproduce? What do you call it? Cancer. Yeah. That's an anomaly. It means you're sick, right? That somebody isn't cooperating anymore. Self-interest moving to selfishness makes you sick. So there's so many things that you can point to bodies in when you're trying to explain how to make a better world or why you want to do things this way. Right? So these are wonderful lessons.
James Lovelock.
Oh, James Lovelock, yes, of course. Lovelock was working for NASA. He was an atmospheric scientist, and NASA hired him to help them find life on other planets. And he explained to NASA, he figured out, you know, from Earth, you can look at whatever other planets or moons have atmospheres. We can actually measure what's in those atmospheres with spectrometry, right? And you can tell from what the gases are, whether it's a stable, inert atmosphere or whether it's our kind of atmosphere where there's constant replacing of oxygen and carbon dioxide and the other elements in the atmosphere, that we can see from here whether a planet is alive or not. So he kind of discovered the life of Earth by looking for life on other planets, which I think is interesting. And when he visited me, I was living on a Greek island, and I had sent him my earliest book based on his work with Lynn Margulis, and said, I want, would you mind looking at this and checking it out? And he liked it so much that he actually came to visit me, and he spent 10 days with me on a little tiny island in Greece. And we had wonderful conversations. And among other things, this was in the 1980s, he said, Elisabet, pray, we are going into the ice age that we are now due for, because it looks like we may tip the planet into a hot age. And while humans have survived about a dozen ice ages every 100,000 years, more or less, and it's time for one again, we have never survived a hot age. The planet has. Earth has been completely ice-free, and Earth has been snowball Earth, almost entirely ice-covered, and, has gotten through those extremes in climates, and has had 5 great extinctions before the one we are causing, when life was up to 95% of all life was just extinguished. Still that 5% used every crisis as an opportunity to make many new kinds of species. And it's because the dinosaurs died in the last of such extinctions that it was possible for the mammals to become a more dominant species than they had been before. So what's happened? We have indeed tipped the Earth in the direction of a hot age. An ice age is 6 to 8 degrees Celsius cooler than what we consider normal. A hot age is 6 to 8 degrees hotter than what we consider normal. Can we survive this hot age that's now coming on very quickly or not? Everybody should know how exponential curves work. Long, slow buildup, and then suddenly, psh, like that. If you look at the curves of human populations, when I was a kid, the Earth was less than 1/3 of the current population. And now suddenly, woo, such a huge expanse. Why? The use of fossil fuels is another such curve. And the fossil fuels permitted the vast expansion of food supply and things, and we got more and more people very quickly. Almost everything in human history that you look at the curve, it's that kind of a curve. You cannot go to infinity. It's another reason why the current civilization must collapse, because it can't go on. You can't have an infinite number of people on the planet, obviously, right? So now we are facing this hot age, and we really should take it very, very seriously, because it will not happen on a slow, predictable increase. The sea level will not go up a centimeter at a time. You are going to have sudden jumps. The best climatologist in America, James Hansen, stood with me in Tokyo at sea level, and we looked at the big buildings, and he said, Elisabet, can you imagine the water at the 15th story of this building, 60 meters higher than the sea is today? It can go there. If all the ice of Earth melts, that is how much the sea level will rise. The oceans are warming, that expands them, and the ice is coming off the polar, especially Greenland, which now has skirt ice on the sea itself, holding up the rest of the ice. But from the top of the ice, I have a pilot friend, a woman, very senior pilot with United Airlines, who has been flying over Greenland a long time. And she said, you can see the water going down these holes on the top of the ice. That water goes all the way down to the rock, maybe more than a mile. And down there, the water is starting to lubricate the ice that sits on this rock. When you take the ice that's holding it up in the sea away, when that's gone, things will start sliding. Nothing there to prevent a domino effect where one pack of snow comes after the other suddenly, and the sea level rises. A tsunami comes, washes over you, and when it goes out, you are left with another 1, 2, possibly 3 meters overnight of water. This is how nature works. It's not going to be a gradual night. Oh, in 100 years it will be 2 feet higher. The curve is this way now. So we all have to think about this. We have to build this better world at the same time that we're facing this climate catastrophe. And it is a catastrophe. And the food supply is already going down in the world. We have already in East Africa mass starvation, and in other places. So these are the realities of the future we face. I believe that the human species can survive, but almost certainly in much smaller numbers. So I like to say to audiences, you and your family and your friends can survive if you take these things seriously and figure out what do we need to do under these circumstances to build our better world despite what's happening. Because I go around the world and see, many people have great ideas for the new society, but they want to build it as if we can do business as usual and just wait for the civilizational collapse we'd be building without having any big climate change to worry about. So I don't want to depress anyone. I remain an optimist. And I know that there will be far fewer humans in the future. So.
Okay, I think it's time for dialogue. Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like Chicken Little, saying the sky is falling and nobody wants to believe it.
Yeah, please.
Somebody has to say it.
Please, can you say some words about the super systems?
About what?
Super systems.
So.
Super?
Not super system.
Maybe you can tell about yourself. Tell yourself a bit. What do you mean by super systems?
This very big ecosystems or
For example.
planetary systems. Supersysteemid on selline.
Planetary systems?
Super systems, planetary systems. You mean?
Well, planetary systems. For instance, the hydrological cycles of planet Earth are as important in climate change as taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Is it that kind of thing? Can you talk a little bit about what you mean?
Organization of super systems.
Huh?
How big systems are organized.
How big systems are organized? The same way little systems are.
Maybe a good question. I think maybe the difference between mechanism and organism, or I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not clear on what you mean. I mean,
let's say how life organizes itself, maybe main features.
Well, the definition of life I adopted is Maturana and Varela, the biologists from South America, who said the definition of life is a self-organizing system that can grow itself, heal itself, change itself from the inside, as opposed to a mechanism which we invent with always an outside inventor. The Maturana Varela definition is called autopoiesis. How many of you have heard the word autopoiesis, right? Autopoiesis in Greek means self-writing poetry, basically, self-organization. The difference between mechanism and organism is that the mechanism always has an inventor behind it. It's an outside force creating the robotics. Now, you can write algorithms so that the robot, to a certain extent, can repair itself. We're right now going through this whole AI business where the chatbots have gotten out of hand and are starting to lie, and it's falling apart. They have too much information and they're failing to stay on track, if you like. So we're learning. That lesson, I think, is very interesting. It came on very fast, and I think it will go out very fast. We have a lot of, especially male scientists, who want to outdo the creation process of nature and want to invent things that are better than nature has invented. I don't think that's possible. So, but what I mean by large systems and small systems is the same way that an individual cell, which as Toomas said, is as complex as a large human city, is organized. We see it in the city, the same kind of organization. We even invent electric motors without ever having seen under a microscope those motors from the past, and somehow we end up making a very similar configuration, even if it's much less efficient. So always in nature, I believe the self-organization process is the same at all size levels. I don't know if that is an answer to your question or not. Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Any other
ideas, questions?
Ideas, comments,
Yeah.
questions?
I have a question.
Yeah?
Oh, good.
What do you think, what shape is the universe?
What shape is the universe?
Very good question.
Good question. One idea that I learned from a friend of mine named Nassim Haramein, and also from scientists in England before Einstein, they used to smoke pipes and blow smoke rings. Have you ever seen a smoke ring? And they decided that shape of a smoke ring, like a ring donut, you know the donut, the word, is self-sufficient. It can keep its form in the air, and it rotates this way, and it also rotates around this way, right? So imagine if the universe is that shape, and you were standing up on it, and you were looking down into the hole, and you would say, oh wow, the universe has expanded. A big bang must have happened to make it so big as where I am now, because you don't notice that it's also going around and going back inside the hole from the other side. What is that? That coming together force we call gravity. The fanning out force we call radiation. So I think the universe balances radiation with gravitation. Whether it's exactly the form of a smoke ring, I can't tell you. Maybe after I graduate away from my body, maybe I'll find out. But
Please send a
Yeah.
mail to him. Then if you find out, please send a mail.
oh yes, let him know. But you know, he might figure it out himself. What do you think it is, the shape of the universe?
Because the universe is infinite.
It's infinite.
I don't know. The donut shape seems logical.
It's also
Because it goes like inside out and there's like infinitely.
It's infinitely can do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't believe in one big bang that expanded the universe. I think the people who say that don't notice gravity because they can't see it through the telescope. But it must be there. The universe is always in balance between outward and inward. Do you know the yin-yang symbol?
Yeah, of course.
That's a perfect flat representation of this donut. See, one half of it is showing the inward way, and the other half is showing the outward force. And the two dots are really just seeing it from the top and the bottom. Does that make sense to you?
And the donut seems logical because it can infinitely go inside out and outside in.
Exactly.
If the universe was a circle, it can't do that. Any other shape could do that.
That's right. Good for you.
Only a donut.
You see?
He's with me. We're agreed. Thank you.
se on vist eesti keeles on türoid või mis
Yeah, no, torus, toroid.
It's called a T-O-R-U-S in English.
Taurus.
It's that. Did you know that you are a Taurus? The definition of a torus is one solid object with only one hole through it. So imagine a teacup or coffee cup that's soft enough so that you can push the cup into a ball. The only hole was the one through the handle. So technically, even a coffee cup is a torus. What about you? This is the hole through you, and it's only one, and you know where it comes out the other end. So technically, your gut bacteria could walk out of your mouth and go down your skin and get in the other way, right? Or the other way around. It's kind of a fun thing to know about, isn't it, to tell kids, you're a Taurus. And I don't mean astrologically.
Taurus.
What grade are you in?
I'm going to 5th grade.
Into 5th?
Yeah.
You're doing good. I think you're going to go places. What do you want to do in the world? Do you have a mission?
No.
Not yet. Good. Keep exploring. I'm glad you came.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, I have
Yes.
one question. What do you think what will happen after this cooperative era? You say that at first it's like this teenage era that hopefully becomes this cooperative era, but what will happen after?
Well, that depends on how long we can make it last. Some indigenous cultures have lasted for thousands of years in a cooperative, mature mode. You know, we tend to project back as if there's a linear history where first you had hunter-gatherers, like in The Man Who Spoke Snake, and then you had agriculture coming in, and then you had technology, and now we're all in industrial and post-industrial. But as soon as humans started making societies, they built both kinds, the kind of command and control where somebody's on top like a king, and the kind where it's more equitable and cooperative, have always existed, even side by side in the Indus Valley that we call the cradle of civilization. So both kinds of human organization have always existed. And some of them have lasted a long time. That's why we still have indigenous cultures, is because some of them lasted so long. Yeah, sun is coming down.
I have to just not clarify, but the man who spoke snake is mees, kes teadis ussisõnu. And Elisabet read this STEM text of our culture because it's available in English. But if I may add, just briefly, one idea that has been really inspirational to me is that that maybe planets have also their kind of not a life cycle, but what I mean is that maybe planets can also somehow graduate in this sense that the humans or any other human type species, they will learn, they take the exam of, they learn how to cooperate, and then it's just the beginning, it's not the end. And maybe planets could also have a mission of maybe going to other planets or whatever. Yeah, I know this thought that, okay, we will learn how to cooperate and then we will live in peace forever, but it sounds very boring.
Well, but consider, is there any way to bring the shade down a little bit? The sun is like right in my eyes now.
Yeah, she's the local.
I don't know how it works.
It will soon go behind the roof, but yes,
yeah, but that's
she will fix the sun. Yeah.
No, I wanted to say something else about the keyboard to you in particular. And do you believe in aliens?
Yes, I do.
Okay. How come a spaceship can disappear suddenly in the sky? Do you have any ideas about it?
I know. I really don't.
Okay. I have a thought. You remember my keyboard model from matter, energy to consciousness? What if there's such a high-tech society that they know how to move out of the matter and slide themselves up the keyboard to where they're in the non-matter part of the keyboard, then we can't see them anymore, right? So maybe they do that to avoid being shot down by us, because while they're in the matter part of the keyboard, we could actually shoot them with material guns. But if they move out of the way where we can't see them, then they can't be shot. The friend that I mentioned to you that used the toroidal model, he also went out in spaceships as a kid, at your age. he was taken out a number of times, and he learned his geometry from some more advanced civilization. And the last time he went out, he asked them why they always make him forget the trip afterwards, and he wanted to remember it. So they let him remember when they taught him how to fly the ship. And what they did was they merged his mind with the ship itself. They steer it through the non-material part of the keyboard. So suddenly it was like as if he was the whole ship. And he was scared because how was he going to stay up? And so he wobbled it. And they calmed him down and said, "Where do you want to go on Earth?" And he said, "Can we go to Egypt, to the pyramids?" And they said, "Just intend it." And whoop, there it was, pyramids down below. So this merging of mind and matter, our scientists are working very hard to do this. In fact, they have some shot down or crashed spaceships that they have been for many years trying to figure out how they work. And there's many things in medicine where we're working on having the brain control artificial limbs, things like that. These are all efforts to use mind to control matter. And I think these civilizations have always been coming to Earth. When I lived in the Peruvian Andes, most people accepted that they come. The spaceships land. They can go under the ice on the mountain or into the water in a lake. And they called the beings that came from elsewhere the doctors, because they seemed always to be in white. And they could fix cars and they could heal people equally well. So the local population accepted them and didn't try to get rid of them, right? So it was a safe place for them to land. I thought you might be interested in that story.
I got a thought in the alien spaceship thing that you started to talk about in the beginning, that maybe they disappear because they have discovered wormholes, invisible wormholes that we haven't discovered yet.
Mm-hmm. That's true. They can go from one place to another suddenly that way.
So they kind of spy on us and then they suddenly gone before we can even record them.
Before we can what? Record them? Yeah. So if they stay around in our sky as a physical ship, we can shoot them. And they don't want that, so they get out of the way, going through a wormhole or disappearing into the non-material end of the keyboard. If you give me, are you on email?
Yeah, I have an email.
You have an email?
I have many.
What?
He has many.
Oh, well, if you
Just
have
pick
one
one
that you
of them,
pay
yeah.
attention to and you give it to me, I'll send you a one-page article about the keyboard, if you would like that. Okay. Write your name down and your email address for me, if you can in
Please.
English.
Sure. Elisabet will answer for sure.
My name and email. My name and email.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. Any other?
Any
idea?
last questions? Or comments?
Just you. Yeah.
You mentioned about consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain how to put this into this picture?
Well, to me, the whole universe is cosmic consciousness. And so everything that forms within the universe is within consciousness and is conscious. Does that answer the question, or?
Leaves a lot of other questions.
It's hard to define it because everything we know, feel, see, taste, touch, smell comes in through our consciousness. And in a physics textbook in school, you will see like a balloon with mind coming out of the brain. Oh, that reminds me of another thing that Nassim when he saw often when they show the universe expanding in a textbook, they show a face blowing up a balloon so that you will understand that the balloon is expanding like the universe. And so Nassim would say, well, the reason that the balloon is expanding is because the person's lung is contracting. See, this is again the in and out, having to have the radiation and the gravitation in balance. In the school books, they'll show the universe expanding like a balloon. And to show that it's a balloon, they have somebody blowing it up, just a little face showing blowing it up. And Nassim said to the teacher, but the reason the balloon is expanding is because the guy's lungs are contracting, expelling the air that's going into the balloon. If the man wasn't there blowing up the balloon, it wouldn't blow up. Right? And so he was again trying to show that the contraction has to be balancing the expansion, the gravity and the radiation. Fun?
One more question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts about the future medicine? For example, Einstein, they say that he has said that the future medicine is frequency medicine. What do you think
Frequency
about that?
medicine?
Yes.
Well, I do believe in energy healing. Frequency medicine is just about energy healing. But the future of medicine, I think, is going back to natural food and Kaya's herbs, growing natural herbs, natural food, natural energy management. These are the things we want. Instead of having big pharma, which the big pharmaceutical companies are in business to make money. And so the longer they can keep you sick and sell you medicines, the more money they make. So the motivation is wrong. And therefore, they say that all the natural healing or the very inexpensive medications that are out of patent, like several of them, were wonderful cures for COVID. And soldiers in Vietnam, for instance, had to take hydroxychloroquine every day not to get malaria. And it's cheap, it has never harmed people, but it was said to be a harmful, bad drug, and don't take it. So we were misled because of the profit-seeking about some of these things that were declared misinformation.
You talked a lot about bacteria, but what the role of viruses in human body?
Oh,
yeah.
I think I don't believe that viruses evolved before bacteria. It kind of doesn't make sense. I think bacteria invented viruses as storage capsules for genetic material. It's always DNA or RNA inside the virus, and then the protein coat with the address on it, so that it can knock on a cell door and either be allowed in or not. You know the kind of thing, I suspect.
Yeah, but I thought that we have, let's say, good bacteria and bad bacteria.
Yeah, of course.
Do we have good viruses or bad viruses? Or if a virus, it's by definition, it's like a bad for health? Or,
Whether the virus is good or bad, it always depends on relationship again. Some of the viruses are obviously harmless. You know what an exosome is. Your cells are constantly spitting out all these particles, including things that look exactly like the coronavirus. And they go into the intercellular fluid, and they're either addressed packages that are supposed to go to a different location, or they're waste to be recycled. And so that micro world is fascinating, and we're learning more and more about it all the time now. Yeah.
No, it's being said that viruses are the most what's the word?
Virulent.
Not virulent, but no. There are more viruses in the world than any other entities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are I don't know, quadrillions of viruses. And so they're all around, and they are in our genome, in every cell there are viruses.
Because every cell is making these things.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So,
each cell has a different configuration of, you
so
know, we
I
know
just,
how much.
I just had this kind of a metaphor came to me at the moment that, for example, there are like flyers or posters with information. They're all around, all kinds of flyers, posters, whatever, and most of them are just neutral. Some are interesting, and then some may be really virulent. I mean, they say that go and do something bad, you know, and some people will follow them.
The bacteria, your gut bacteria, one of their jobs is to recognize the harmful ones and inactivate them, right?
So that's an interesting thing to think that thanks to Earth Dance and other books and thinkers as well, that we are kind of like living in a sea of information. Viruses, bacteria, some kind of DNA bits, RNA bits, so we are like swimming in it, and we use some, and then some are harmful.
But in your view, is consciousness or maybe soul, is it immortal or is it close to soul?
To me, it's absolutely primary. It's everything. It's all that is. And the matter forms within it by the vibrations of consciousness becoming denser. It's simplified perhaps too much, who knows? But if you take as a hypothesis a living conscious universe where everything is happening within a sea of consciousness, limitless sea of consciousness, then you have less problem explaining things like how does life come out of non-life. Right? I think non-life, the concept of non-life, was invented by Western science. I don't find it in the other sciences of the world. It's not in any indigenous culture. That concept of non-life, I think, was posited by Western science, and it helped them develop mechanisms and things like that. To me, by the way, a mechanism is conscious at the particle and atomic level and somewhat molecular level, but we have taken these resources and done this heating, beating, treating, and making them into metal parts and building an automobile from it. Many people, I think, have had the experience of naming their car and talking to it, and it's almost as if you're giving permission to the life at the tiniest level that it's okay, I recognize the life in you. And it's as if, okay, somebody recognizes me. I mean, look at a tree. How many people say hello to trees when they walk by? And yet we know there's a great book called Brilliant Green by Stefano Mancuso, an Italian guy, who has been studying plants and trees, and who talks about how trees they can see, they can hear, they can touch, they can taste, they can smell, even if they don't have eyes and ears. These abilities to see and hear and all are built in up and down the trunk and in the leaves and in the roots. And we have measured up to 12 senses that the trees have that we don't have. So you might have to say that a tree is much more intelligent than a human. And I've had tree friends who have done me favors to protect certain indigenous people that were being taken out of their culture to show off as shamans or whatever. I have asked trees to do me favors that they have done. So I should tell you about the difference between communication and communion. Oh, I have a book for you. Kinship with All Life, right? Kinship with All Life is a book in which Hollywood movie making, long time ago, were looking for the most intelligent dog in the world. And they finally imported a German police dog to bring to Hollywood. And a very good trainer undid all his police dog conditioning to see who is this dog naturally. what is the dog's dogality? I don't want to say personality, right? And the author of the book had to take care of this dog for 6 weeks while the trainer was away. So he decided he was going to do everything the dog wanted to do, he would do it at the same time. Dog wanted to eat, he ate. Dog wanted to run, he ran. Dog wanted to sleep, he slept. And one day they were sitting on a cliff looking over the ocean, and the author is sitting behind the dog, and the dog is looking out at sea. And he's sitting there and his mind is going, is the dog looking above the horizon or below? What is on his mind? Does he blah, 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 blah? His mind was running. And the dog turned around, looked him in the eye for a minute, and then went back to what he was doing. And in that moment, all his questions were answered. How come? What was this? This is what I call communion, the direct transfer of information from one living being to another. And the book he writes about how as he learned to do this with the dog, he could exchange information with him and have deep philosophical conversations, not as a man and a dog talking to each other, but as the universe talking them to each other. So I went once into the rainforest in Brazil a long time ago, and I asked an Amazon Indian, can you teach me how to talk to the plants and animals? You know what he said? Shut up, Elisabet, and listen. The conversation has been going on as long as the forest has been here. It's not yours to start it, it's yours to hear it first. So I learned that this is possible, and you can do this with an animal, you can do it with a tree. Practice. Takes a little practice. But it can be done, and when you do it, you have a whole new world opened up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. Have you ever done it?
No.
Okay. Now you have something new to do. But you have to sit and listen to them, and then you can ask them questions. Ask them to do you favors. Interesting. Anyway, I think we should probably adjourn.
Yeah. Or is there any other last?
One last.
Question.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
knew.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think an atom's nucleus is made of?
What do I think an atom's nucleus is made of? Well, we call them subatomic particles, right?
Because I know an atom is made of quarks,
Yes, that's a subatomic particle.
but then there's the nucleus.
Yeah?
That's even smaller. What's that made of?
The nucleus of the atom
Yes.
is made of quarks inside the nucleus.
Protons and neutrons.
Oh. Okay.
It's tiny
What
bits all the way down until you're in pure consciousness.
What are quarks made of?
Well, that's what I said. You can have tiny bits within tiny bits as long as you want to play that game, and then you realize it's all consciousness in the end, forming itself into these patterns. At least that's how it looks to me. That doesn't mean it is that way, and you may find a better explanation yourself. There's always room for new people to find new ways to talk about these things.
And do you think that fractals are really infinite?
Fractals,
Yes. Or do they have an end?
are they infinite or do they have an end?
Yes.
What do you think?
No, they might have an end or they might not.
I agree.
I don't really know.
I don't really know either. I mean, patterns can expand and repeat themselves outward, and they can contract and do the same thing inward. But how far in can they go? Where do you end up? I think you end up like the quantum scientists in the field of consciousness. Yeah, but there's no limit because everything, as you already know, is infinite. There's no wall around the universe.
Okay.
Okay. I'm glad you came.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mahalo. Thank you. And